What's up, everyone? Today we're talking about two tactics that are pretty prominent in Squad, which are rushing and backlining. I wanted to break these down in a way that could be accepted amongst a wide variety of players in terms of hours and experience. So you may be able to implement these into your gameplay or better identify what's happening to your team if you are affected by these tactics. So hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below with any thoughts or suggestions that you have, and let's get to it. Quick disclaimer is that you should follow whatever rules are in the server that you are playing in. Some servers have rules that affect or hamper the ability for a team to rush, whereas some servers actually have rules that focus more so on objective play that may affect backlining or where you can backline. So now let's start breaking down what rushing is. Now, rushing typically involves a little bit of probability. What you're looking for is a point, maybe one of the enemy team's first 3 points to attack very quickly right as the round starts. Furthermore, you're typically going to want a decent amount of speed, so you might pack into a light vehicle, let's say a Tiger. So since it's a 7 objective layer, we're looking at 4th cap as being the middle point. And to some extent, you're basing this off probability or map familiarity because what you're looking at is the first objective your team has to cap, and you're trying to determine the lane that's going to be followed throughout the map to figure out what position you need to put your troops in, near what objective the enemies might be at. It's not even uncommon just to position where you think a cluster of objectives may be for the enemy team and trying to get near there so that you can determine which route you need to take moving forward based on what you hear or see. But typically, the best rush is going to be something where you dive a vehicle into a position, get down a rally, and you begin disrupting the enemy's team's ability to move forward. Maybe you stall the cap as well, allowing your team more time to progress forward behind you. And even if you don't stall the enemy team from capturing that objective, you're probably disrupting something, either maybe a logistics vehicle, transport, or just infantry moving from that cap to the next one. You'll typically have more advanced players do this really effectively. Stalling that second or third cap can mean that your team has a higher chance of being able to capture an extra objective or two. Like, I've seen those rushes that can disrupt enough to allow your team to capture a neutral objective and then take an objective from the enemy team, resulting in an 80-point swing, not including any radios or vehicles destroyed along the way. So depending on how effective you can be, by capturing one neutral objective, that's 20 tickets. By capturing an enemy objective, that's 60 tickets. Let's say you destroy an enemy fob along the way, that's another 20 tickets reduced from the enemy team, along with a vehicle, maybe a logistics vehicle that was there to set up that radio. Just with this basic example that doesn't include every factor like infantry deaths, this could create a swing of 105 tickets because you're boosting your ticket count by 80 while reducing the enemy's team ticket count by 25. This, of course, does not include how disruptive this can be for the enemy team over the course of the match with regards to losing so much map control and their just sort of inability to move forward without taking some losses. Now, obviously, this can cause some imbalance in servers because you may have more advanced players on one side that are determined to do this and can do it effectively, especially given map knowledge. But as we all know, and we've discussed plenty of times before, random advanced and secure is not that random. And currently it seems like we have a little bit of a lack of layers. So that makes it easier to define some of those lanes and how to go about your rush. So while rushing can be extremely effective, disruptive, it can also be discouraging for the opposing team. Now, there are some servers that have rule sets against rushing. For example, maybe you have to have both defense points revealed before you attack an objective behind the enemy's defense point. Or maybe there's just no rushing on the first or second objective for the enemy team. It's more likely that these server rules are going to exist in new player-friendly servers instead of experienced preferred servers. I think you have to be careful with this sort of rule set just because it can establish some bad habits. It gives you a false sense of security, and you don't get the opportunity to really adapt and understand how to deter certain situations from happening if the rule set helps guide the gameplay a certain way. So it's important as you push to your first, second, third objectives that you are prepared for some sort of contact. While server rules may protect you in some places, they may not exist in other places. Now, the other tactic we're going to discuss is backlining. Now, I'm going to give you a pretty simple breakdown of what this is, similar to what I've done with rushing to help newer players understand what's happening. Great backlining is like an art form because you are essentially working behind enemy lines, hence backlining, to disrupt their ability to really hold steady at the front lines. This can be done in a bunch of different ways. In some situations, it may be a couple small squads working behind enemy lines. It could just be a hat kit with a rifleman and a Humvee sitting there picking off armor as they roll up to the front lines. Backline squads are typically working to disrupt enemy positions. They're the group that's going to arrive from a direction that's less expected and start disrupting enemy fobs, spawns, vehicles to make it a little bit easier for when the rest of the force pushes up to attack. Now, sometimes you have folks that are looking to actually rush an objective, but they get the objective wrong, and that can actually become the backline squad. So for example, earlier we rushed cannabis, but the actual point goes to warehouse, and then it's going to be checkpoint for the enemy team. That group that rushed cannabis could then start backlining against the enemy team somewhere around warehouse and checkpoint. So if you're the enemy team, you have to be able to account for this in some way, and that's typically through intel. There has to be some form of communication that there is some sort of backline squad causing disruptions with your supply lines or just creating some chaos for your team. And then you need to address that quickly, because if they are mobile, it gets really hard to track down where that backline group is. And to an extent, the just mere threat of the backline squad can be more of a disruption than the backline squad itself. For example, if you're basing intel off of what you just received, by the time you're driving your vehicle through an area, it's too late. They've already repositioned for where you are driving in an area that you thought was safe. Now, I think it's important for backline squads to be realistic and honest with what they are doing and how effective they are being. There's certainly situations where a backline squad can find themselves well out of play, so it's up to them to reposition and try to affect the gameplay. There are certainly those times in pub matches where the best thing a backline squad can do is just start softening up those objectives that your team needs to capture. They could go in, maybe disrupt a fob. They don't even have to dig everything down or destroy anything, as much as just make it hard for the enemies to live there so that your team can then advance on that position. You can make things more difficult for an enemy team by not only attacking along the front line, but having a group behind, forcing the enemy team to defend both the front line and behind them. For backlining, I'd also like to add that I don't think this requires a 9-man squad. This is something typically better suited for maybe a couple of 3-man squads, maybe a couple of 4-man squads, or something along those lines, giving you greater control over the area that you may be playing within, and not necessarily making a detriment to your team by not having enough bodies on the front line. Just being mindful of this, I think, is important, because you can still be effective with just a couple people as long as you're honest about what you're trying to accomplish in that role. Now, something to highlight as more of an overview is combining these tactics together. The rush squad slows down caps, giving time for the backline squad to slowly and stealthily get in position to cause chaos behind enemy lines. Doing these two things effectively and simultaneously can be a really effective way of slowing down an enemy team. But I can't stress enough that you can also become a detriment if you aren't doing the things that you need to do to be effective. If effectiveness is not happening, as in you aren't really doing anything to change the gameplay of the enemy team, you're probably not helping the team as a whole. It wouldn't be crazy to see a rush squad end up at the wrong objective and then find themselves out of play, at least for a brief time. It's sort of about adapting after that to figure out, okay, how can I be effective at this stage in the game? The same thing goes for backlining. You may think you're off to something good, but you end up in a position where you're not seeing any enemy traffic and your team is getting clobbered. You may have to adapt. You may have to go in, try to find opportunities to help disrupt enemy positions closer to where your team is playing. So in my opinion, an SL with pretty good game sense or game awareness is really important to doing these two things effectively. Sometimes knowing just when to adjust, when to call it off, or reposition entirely is more significant than the tactic you set out to do at the beginning of the round. So with all that said, I hope this video was helpful, especially if you're a relatively new player trying to identify different ways of playing the game, or just help identify the ways that maybe more advanced players are affecting your gameplay. And I thought the best way to do that was just with some simple examples of how these things work in-game. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, leave a like on the video, and drop a comment down below if you have any thoughts or suggestions, and I'll catch you next time.